Close your eyes for just a moment and picture the vastness of the Egyptian desert, endless golden sands stretching to the horizon, shimmering under an unforgiving sun. It feels like the last place on Earth you'd expect life to flourish, doesn't it? But hidden within this harsh landscape are lush, green pockets of paradise oases that have sustained communities for thousands of years. And at the very heart of these miraculous havens was one of the most vital and fascinating roles in all of ancient Egypt, the Oasis Date Farmer. Imagine waking each day to the gentle rustle of palm fronds and the scent of ripening fruit, a world away from the pyramids and pharaohs we so often associate with this legendary civilization. Yet these farmers were true unsung heroes, masters of survival in one of the planet's most extreme environments, and their story is one of ingenuity, resilience, and quiet wonder. Today, we're going to step into their sandals and explore what daily life was really like for these remarkable individuals. We'll walk through sun-drenched groves, learn the secrets of cultivating the fruit of the gods, and discover how these farmers didn't just grow dates, they sustained entire cultures, fueled trade routes, and turned barren isolation into thriving communities. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an invitation to journey back in time, to truly understand a way of life that blended backbreaking labor with profound connection to the land and the rhythms of nature. So come with me, let's leave the modern world behind and immerse ourselves in the hidden, thriving world of the ancient Egyptian oasis farmer. Now, to truly appreciate the life of an oasis farmer, we first need to understand the stage on which this entire drama unfolded. That stage was the oasis itself, a genuine miracle of nature. Think of the Egyptian desert not as a blank, empty canvas, but as a vast, sun-bleached ocean of sand and stone. The temperatures are extreme, soaring to heights that are almost unimaginable during the day, then plummeting to a startling chill once the sun vanishes. This is a land where water isn't just scarce, it's virtually non-existent on the surface. The wind carries fine, abrasive sand that can strip paint from metal and skin from bone over time. Survival here, for any form of life, seems like an outright impossibility, and yet, nestled within these immense, daunting dunes, you would find them the oases. These were not mere puddles or small springs. We're talking about vast, sprawling depressions in the desert floor, some of them sinking hundreds of feet below the surrounding landscape. This unique geography was their secret weapon. Deep beneath the sand, hidden from the relentless sun, lay massive reservoirs of ancient water, fossil water stored in aquifers for millennia. Through cracks in the Earth's crust, this precious water would well up to the surface, creating natural springs and pools. This was the lifeblood of everything that followed. This single, constant source of water created a microclimate, a world within a world. The air immediately around an oasis was different, noticeably more humid, carrying the distinct, sweet smell of damp earth and growing things. Towering date palms formed a dense, green canopy overhead, their broad leaves acting as a natural sunshade, cooling the ground below and reducing evaporation from the precious water sources. This canopy created a sanctuary for an entire ecosystem. Beneath the palms, farmers could cultivate other crops like figs, pomegranates, and grains. Birds nested in the fronds, their songs a stark contrast to the silent desert outside. It was a lush, vibrant, and incredibly fragile island of green, utterly dependent on that one critical resource, water. Without it, this entire paradise would vanish back into the sand in a matter of seasons. The farmer's entire existence was a partnership with this delicate, miraculous balance. The day of an oasis farmer began not with a blaring alarm, but with the profound and absolute silence of the desert night beginning to soften. Long before the sun's first rays could gild the tops of the date palms, the household would stir. There was a chill in the pre-dawn air, a stark contrast to the blistering heat that would follow, making these the most precious hours for work. The farmer would rise from a simple bed, perhaps a woven mat on a mud brick platform, and after a light, simple breakfast of leftover flatbread and maybe some dates from the previous season, the real work of the day commenced. This was a life governed not by the clock, but by the sun and the seasons, a rhythm as old as agriculture itself. His first task, often before even taking a full drink of water himself, was to check on the lifeblood of the entire operation, the water channels. The complex network of irrigation ditches, painstakingly dug and maintained, had to be inspected for any nighttime blockages from wind-blown sand or debris. Clearing these channels with a wooden shovel or his hands ensured that every drop of precious water would flow exactly where it was needed most. This wasn't just a chore, it was a sacred duty. The success of every single crop, and by extension the survival of his family and community, depended on the meticulous management of this single, vital resource. With the water flowing, the heart of the work could begin. A huge portion of the day was dedicated to the date palms themselves. These trees were more than just crops, they were lifelong partners. The farmer knew each one intimately which tree produced the sweetest fruit, which was susceptible to a certain blight, which needed extra support for a heavy-laden branch. He might spend hours high among the fronds, carefully pollinating the female trees by hand using pollen collected from the male flowers, a delicate and crucial process that required a steady hand and a keen eye. Other tasks included pruning dead leaves to encourage new growth, tying up heavy bunches of developing fruit to prevent the branches from snapping, and constantly watching for any signs of pests or disease. But the oasis was a diverse garden, not a single crop farm. In the dappled shade beneath the towering palms, the farmer and his family tended to a whole understory of life. There were small plots of emmer wheat and barley, vital for making the bread that was the staple of their diet. There might be fig trees, pomegranate bushes, and vegetable patches containing onions, leeks, and cucumbers. Tending to these required constant weeding, careful watering, and protection from the few animals that shared their green sanctuary. This intercropping was a masterpiece of ancient permaculture, each plant supporting the others in a carefully balanced, sustainable system. The midday sun brought the desert's full fury, forcing a necessary pause. The heat was so intense that all but the most essential outdoor work had to stop. This was a time for retreat, for seeking the cool shade of the home's thick mud brick walls. It was a time for a shared meal, often a stew of vegetables and perhaps some fish from the oasis pools, eaten with more fresh bread. This break was for rest, repair of tools, and family time, a chance to escape the oppressive heat and regain strength for the afternoon's labor. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows through the palm groves, activity would resume with a renewed vigor. The cooler air made physical labor bearable again. This second shift might involve processing the day's harvest, repairing walls or fences, or tending to any livestock the family kept, a few goats for milk or some ducks that paddled in the irrigation channels. As dusk finally settled, bringing a rapid and welcome coolness, the family would gather for their main meal. This was the time for storytelling, for sharing the day's events, and for planning the work to come. The day ended much as it began, in relative quiet, under a blanket of stars infinitely brighter than anything we can see today, the farmer's body tired but his mind content, knowing he had once again successfully nurtured life in the heart of the desert. Mastering the cultivation of the date palm was the very essence of the oasis farmer's expertise, a sophisticated art form passed down through countless generations. It began with choosing the right location, a decision that went far beyond simple real estate. While the oasis itself provided the water, not every patch of ground was created equal. The farmer sought out soil with just the right composition, a mix that could hold moisture from the irrigation channels without becoming waterlogged and drowning the sensitive roots. He would observe how water drained across the land after a rare rain, noting which areas stayed damp longest. He also had to consider the delicate canopy above. A new sapling needed enough sunlight to thrive, but could be stunted if placed directly in the deep shadow of a mature giant. This initial placement was a long-term investment, as a well-situated palm could feed a family for over a century. The growth cycle of the date palm itself dictated the rhythm of the entire agricultural year, a slow, patient dance with nature. Unlike annual crops that are planted and harvested within a single season, a date palm requires years of careful nurturing before it offers its first fruit. A farmer might plant a seed knowing he would not live to taste the harvest from that specific tree, a true testament to his connection to future generations. For more immediate results, farmers often propagated new trees by carefully removing and replanting the offshoots, known as pups, that sprouted from the base of healthy mature palms. These genetic clones of the parent tree would bear fruit much faster and guarantee the quality of the dates produced. Perhaps the most delicate and crucial task in the entire cycle was pollination. The date palm is dioecious, meaning individual trees are either male or female. Only the female trees produce the precious fruit, but they are entirely dependent on pollen from the male trees to do so. Nature would eventually accomplish this through the wind, but the oasis farmer couldn't leave such a vital process to chance. He became an active participant in this botanical romance. During the brief flowering season, he would climb the male palms to collect their pollen-laden flowers, a fine, golden dust. He would then carefully climb each female tree whose flowers were ready to receive this gift and manually dust the pollen onto them, often tying a male flower cluster directly into the female inflorescence to ensure success. This hands-on intervention dramatically increased the yield, resulting in heavier, sweeter, and more abundant clusters of dates. This act was more than farming, it was a form of sacred stewardship, a direct hand in continuing the cycle of life. The importance of the date palm to the oasis ecosystem cannot be overstated. It was the literal and figurative pillar that held the entire world together. Its towering crown provided essential shade, creating a cooler microclimate beneath it that reduced water evaporation from the soil and allowed other, more sensitive crops like figs and vegetables to flourish. This layered approach to farming, using the vertical space from the high canopy down to the ground level, is an ancient form of what we now call permaculture, and it maximized the output of every single drop of water. The palm's fallen fronds were never wasted. They were woven into baskets, mats, and roofing material. The fibrous husks surrounding the date seeds were used as fuel for fires or as coarse fodder for animals. Every part of the tree served a purpose, creating a sustainable, waste-free system where everything was utilized. The date palm was not merely a crop they harvested, it was the benevolent guardian of the oasis, the architect of its climate, and the foundation upon which their entire civilization in the sand was built. Keeping that life-giving water flowing to each and every plant was a monumental challenge, one that required incredible ingenuity and relentless effort. The desert was constantly trying to reclaim its own, with shifting sands threatening to fill the canals and the relentless sun doing its best to drink up every exposed droplet. To combat this, oasis farmers became master hydraulic engineers, developing and maintaining a sophisticated network of water management that was the true bedrock of their survival. This system was far more than just ditches in the dirt. It was a carefully orchestrated and constantly monitored distribution network, the most critical piece of infrastructure in their entire world. At the source of everything was the well or the spring, the the point where the ancient fossil water from deep underground finally reached the surface. These weren't just simple holes, many were carefully lined with stone or fired clay to prevent the walls from collapsing and to keep the water clean. From this primary source, a main canal would carry the water toward the groves and garden plots, but the landscape was rarely perfectly flat, so this main artery often had to be carefully dug along a very slight, calculated gradient to let gravity do the work of moving the water where it needed to go. Maintaining this gentle slope over long distances was a testament to their skilled understanding of water's behavior. From the main canal, a branching web of smaller secondary and tertiary channels spread out like veins and capillaries, delivering water to specific plots of land. The flow into these smaller channels was meticulously controlled. A farmer might use a simple, flat stone or a slab of baked mud to partially block a channel's entrance, deftly directing more or less water into it as needed. This required constant attention and fine-tuning throughout the day, especially as different crops had vastly different thirst levels. A date palm's deep roots needed a deep, occasional soaking, while a patch of onions required more frequent, shallower watering. Managing this equitable distribution was a community effort, often governed by strict schedules and traditional rules to ensure no single farmer monopolized the shared resource. For plots of land that sat higher than the water level in the canals, a simple ditch was useless. This is where one of ancient Egypt's most iconic inventions came into play, the shaduf. This brilliantly simple device was a lifeline for elevated fields. Picture a long, horizontal pole balanced on an upright frame, like a seesaw. From one end of the pole hung a counterweight, usually a heavy lump of dried mud or a stone. From the other end dangled a leather bucket. The farmer would pull down on the rope to sink the bucket into the water source below, fill it, and then let the counterweight do most of the work to lift the heavy, full bucket up to the level of the irrigation channel. With a graceful swing, he would then guide the bucket over his plot and empty it. This process was repeated hundreds, even thousands of times a day. It was backbreaking, monotonous labor, but each swing of the shaduf represented another few gallons of life delivered to the crops, another day won against the desert. The entire system demanded daily, unending maintenance. Canals had to be constantly dredged of the silt and sand that naturally accumulated. Their banks needed reinforcement with packed earth and reeds to prevent erosion and leaks. Every member of the family, even children, would have been involved in this upkeep, understanding that a single collapsed channel wall or a blocked conduit could mean the loss of a season's food. This intimate, hands-on relationship with water shaped their entire worldview, fostering a deep, communal respect for this precious resource and the sophisticated, hard-won systems that kept it flowing. The arrival of the harvest season transformed the entire oasis into a symphony of coordinated activity, a peak moment where the entire year's careful labor culminated in a race against time. This was not a task for a single family. It was a communal endeavor that drew everyone together, from the most experienced elders to the youngest children, each with a role to play. The air, already thick with humidity, would become heavy with the intensely sweet, almost caramel-like aroma of millions of ripening dates, a scent that signaled prosperity and survival. The harvest period was relatively short, and the fruit had to be gathered at its absolute peak too early, and the dates would be hard and tasteless too late, and they would become overly soft, ferment, or attract every pest for miles around. This created a palpable sense of urgency, a collective drive to secure the bounty that would see them through the coming year. The work began high above the ground, in the sun-drenched crowns of the palms. Unlike the careful pollination work earlier in the year, harvesting was a test of pure strength, agility, and courage. The farmers who scaled these heights were true athletes. They didn't use ropes or complex harnesses as we might today. Their primary tool was their own skill and a length of coarse, woven rope. One common technique involved using a continuous loop of rope around both the tree's trunk and the climber's back, creating a secure friction hitch that allowed them to walk up the vertical bark, pushing with their legs and adjusting the rope with their hands in a rhythmic, exhausting motion. Other climbers might simply shimmy up using their bare hands and feet, relying on the rough texture of the palm's trunk for grip. However they ascended, it was dangerous work, performed dozens of times a day under the blazing sun, with the ground looking smaller and more distant with each climb. Once nestled among the fronds, the harvester's main tool was a small, curved knife, its blade kept razor sharp. His task was delicate despite the rugged setting. He couldn't simply hack away at the large, heavy clusters of fruit, known as strands. He had to carefully cut the stem connecting the heavy strand to the tree, ensuring a clean cut that wouldn't damage the branch for future harvests. A single misstep could send a valuable strand plummeting to the ground below, bursting upon impact and ruining the precious fruit. The weight was significant. A single mature strand could weigh over 20 pounds, and a prolific tree might have several dozen. The harvester would often lower the cut strands down carefully using another rope, or sometimes, for lower branches, simply drop them into the waiting arms of family members below who stood ready with stretched out cloths or baskets to cushion the fall. On the ground, a second wave of activity burst into life. The fallen strands were quickly gathered and transported to a central processing area, often a cleared, clean space shaded by mats or simple structures. Here, teams of women and older children would take over. Their first job was to gently separate the individual dates from the tough central stem of the strand. This was done by hand with practiced speed, their fingers moving deftly to avoid bruising the soft fruit. The dates were then sorted with a critical eye. The finest, most perfect specimens were set aside to be eaten fresh, a rare and celebrated treat. The majority, however, were destined for preservation, as drying was the key to turning this seasonal abundance into a stable food source that could last for months, even years. The sorted dates were then spread out on large, flat drying mats woven from palm fronds, creating a stunning mosaic of gold, amber, and deep brown under the sun. This was not a passive process. The dates required constant attention. They needed to be turned regularly to ensure even drying and to protect them from insects or opportunistic birds. The desert climate, so often an adversary, became a perfect partner in this stage, with the hot, dry air rapidly pulling moisture from the fruit, concentrating its sugars, and creating the chewy, sweet dried date that was a caloric powerhouse. After several days, once the dates had reached the perfect leathery texture, they were gathered and packed into large, airtight storage jars made of pottery or woven baskets sealed with clay. These vessels were then stored in cool, dark storerooms, becoming the community's insurance against famine, a sweet treasure hoard that represented security, hard work, and the triumphant defiance of a harsh environment. Once the precious dates were safely harvested and sorted, the real alchemy began transforming this fragile, perishable fruit into stable, versatile, and incredibly valuable foodstuffs that could be stored, traded, and savored for years to come. This processing stage was where the Oasis farmer's wife and family truly became innovators, employing techniques honed over centuries to squeeze every last bit of utility and flavor from the bounty of the palms. The methods they used were remarkably effective, turning the simple date into a cornerstone of the ancient Egyptian diet and economy. The most straightforward and common method was sun drying. As we saw with the harvest, vast quantities of dates were laid out on mats in the hot, dry desert air, but this wasn't just leaving fruit out in the sun, it was a carefully managed process. The dates were turned and shifted multiple times a day to ensure every side was exposed evenly, preventing moisture from being trapped in any one spot, which could lead to mold and spoilage. The result was a chewy, intensely sweet, and concentrated fruit that was naturally preserved. Its low moisture content meant it wouldn't support the bacteria that cause rotting. These dried dates were the true workhorse of the storage jar. Packed tightly into large ceramic vessels, they could be sealed and kept in a cool, dark storeroom for an astonishingly long time, serving as a vital source of energy and nutrition during leaner months or on long caravan journeys. They were the ancient equivalent of the energy bar, portable, nutritious, and packed with calories, but the ingenuity didn't stop there. For an even more concentrated and long-lasting food source, dates were often pressed into dense, solid cakes. This process involved taking a large quantity of dried dates and pounding them into a thick, sticky paste using a stone mortar and pestle. Sometimes, other grains like barley or emmer wheat were mixed in to add texture and stretch the valuable ingredient further. This pliable, sweet paste was then pressed into wooden molds or simply shaped by hand into flat, round loaves or bricks and left to harden further in the shade. These date cakes were incredibly durable and calorie-dense. A single brick could provide a huge amount of energy for a laborer, a soldier on the march, or a traveler crossing the desert. They were essentially non-perishable, making them a perfect trade commodity and a reliable emergency ration that could be stored almost indefinitely. Perhaps the most sophisticated product they created was date syrup, known as dibs, or what we might compare to a thick molasses. Creating this liquid gold was a more involved process, but the result was a sweetener that was pure luxury in a world without refined sugar. To make it, dates were first mashed and soaked in large pots of water over a low heat, allowing their sugars to leach out and create a sweet liquor. This liquid was then strained through cloth to remove all the skins and pulp, and the resulting thin syrup was returned to the heat for a long, slow simmer. As the water evaporated, the syrup would reduce down, thickening into a rich, dark, viscous liquid with an incredibly complex caramel-like flavor. This syrup was used to sweeten breads, beers, and desserts for the wealthy. It was also a valuable medicinal base, used to make palatable concoctions of herbs and other remedies. A sealed jar of high-quality date syrup was a treasure, worth its weight in other goods on the trade market. It was these very processed forms of the date, the dried fruit, the durable cakes, the luxurious syrup, that transformed it from a local food source into a powerful engine of trade. While fresh dates were a wonderful seasonal treat, their high water content and fragility made them impossible to transport any significant distance. But a caravan could easily carry sacks of dried dates, bricks of pressed cake, and amphorae of syrup across vast deserts without fear of spoilage. This meant the wealth of the oasis could be exported, traded to the Nile Valley for goods the oasis dwellers lacked: fine linen, papyrus, copper tools, luxury oils, and pottery. The date farmer, through the processing skills of his family, wasn't just feeding his community, he was connecting it to the greatest civilization of the ancient world, turning the fruit of his labor into a currency that sustained life in the desert and brought the wider world to his doorstep. The oasis farm was far more than just a place of work. It was a self-contained world, and the family unit was the beating heart that powered every aspect of its existence. This wasn't a society of isolated individuals. It was a deeply interconnected web of kinship where every single person, from the eldest elder to the youngest child, had a vital and understood role to play. Survival in such a challenging environment demanded this kind of seamless cooperation, forging a family structure that was both a practical necessity and a source of immense strength and identity. The success of the harvest and the continuity of their way of life depended entirely on this collective effort, while the father or patriarch of the family often managed the most physically demanding tasks: the climbing, the heavy irrigation work, and the oversight of the water distribution, this was in no way a sign of a simple male-dominated hierarchy. The reality was a complex and equitable division of labor where the work of women formed the absolute foundation of daily life. The farmer's wife was a manager, a producer, and an innovator in her own right. Her domain extended from the household to the entire processing operation for the farm's bounty. She directed the sorting and drying of the dates, orchestrated the pressing of the date cakes and the simmering of the precious syrup, and managed the stores of food with a meticulous eye, ensuring nothing was wasted. She was also likely in charge of the family's small livestock, like goats or ducks, and the cultivation of the secondary crops growing beneath the palms, the vegetables, herbs, and grains that provided essential variety to their diet. Her work ensured that the raw products of the farm were transformed into the finished goods that meant sustenance and wealth. Children were integrated into the rhythm of work from a very young age, not as a form of hardship, but as a natural and essential part of their upbringing and education. A toddler might begin by simply fetching a small tool or carrying a single date. As they grew, so did their responsibilities. Young boys would accompany their fathers to learn the art of irrigation, helping to clear silt from the canals or carefully opening and closing small water gates. They learned to identify pests and the subtle signs of a thirsty plant. Young girls worked alongside their mothers and aunts, mastering the intricate skills of food preservation, weaving palm fronds into baskets and mats, and grinding grain for bread. This was how knowledge was passed down, not through formal schooling, but through doing, through watching, through stories told while working side by side. By the time a child reached adolescence, they were a highly skilled and productive member of the farm team, possessing a deep, practical understanding of the ecosystem they were destined to steward. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of the Oasis family was its multi-generational nature. It was common for 3, and sometimes even 4, generations to live and work together on the same plot of land. Grandparents were not retirees, they were invaluable repositories of wisdom and experience. A grandfather, too old for the dangerous climb up the palms, might now be the chief toolmaker or repairer, his hands still skilled at tying the perfect rope harness or sharpening a harvesting knife. A grandmother, with decades of experience reading the weather and the health of the trees, might take on the role of primary supervisor for the drying and sorting process, her keen eye able to spot the exact moment a date had reached perfect dryness. This living connection to the past provided stability and continuity. The elders held the long-term memory of the land. They remembered the great drought of 40 years prior and how the family survived it, or which particular tree had been planted to mark a child's birth. Their presence ensured that hard-won lessons were never forgotten, weaving the past, present, and future of the family into a single, unbroken thread deeply rooted in the oasis soil. The home of an oasis farmer was a masterpiece of practical design, built not for grandeur but for one essential purpose: providing respite from the relentless desert climate. Constructed almost entirely from materials found within the oasis itself, these dwellings were a testament to a profound understanding of the local environment and a perfect example of sustainable living. The primary building block was right under their feet: mud. This wasn't just any dirt, it was a specific mixture of the local clay-rich soil, chopped straw for tensile strength, and water from the spring. This humble combination, packed into wooden molds to form bricks and left to bake hard in the sun, created the walls that would shield them from the world outside. The architecture of the home was a direct response to the desert's harsh duality of scorching days and cool nights. Walls were intentionally thick, often several feet deep, acting as a thermal mass that absorbed the intense heat of the afternoon sun, preventing it from penetrating the interior. Then, as the temperature plummeted after sunset, these same walls would slowly release their stored warmth, gently heating the home through the night. Rooms were typically arranged around a central courtyard, an open-air heart of the home that provided light, ventilation, and a private outdoor space for chores and family gatherings. Windows were small and strategically placed high on the walls, not for views, but to encourage the flow of air while keeping the hot sun and blowing sand out. Stepping inside, one would be immediately struck by the temperature difference, a cool, dim serenity that stood in stark contrast to the bright, baking heat outside. The floors were made of packed earth, sometimes covered with woven palm frond mats for comfort. The furniture was minimal and functional: low wooden stools, woven reed chests for storing clothing and valuables, and raised sleeping platforms made of mud brick topped with soft mats. These platforms kept sleepers elevated away from any insects and allowed the cooler air that settled near the floor to circulate beneath them. The air would often carry the subtle, earthy scent of the mud bricks and the sweet, dry aroma of stored dates and grains. The roof was another ingenious element of climate control. Constructed from a framework of sturdy palm logs laid close together, it was topped with multiple layers of bundled reed mats and a final, thick layer of the same mud and straw mixture used for the walls. This composite structure was excellent insulation. During minor and rare winter rains, the mud would swell slightly, becoming almost waterproof. For lighting after dark, the family relied on simple oil lamps, small, shallow bowls filled with precious olive or castor oil, with a twisted flax wick that provided a gentle, flickering light. Every aspect of the home, from its thick walls to its shaded courtyard, worked in harmony to create a sanctuary of comfort and calm, a true refuge carved from the very earth of the oasis itself. While the sweet, sugary date was the undisputed star of the oasis and its most valuable export, the daily diet of the farmer and his family was a remarkably diverse and balanced tapestry of flavors, showcasing a breathtaking level of self-sufficiency. Their meals were a direct reflection of their environment, a creative and nutritious fusion of everything their lush island in the sand could provide. Forget any notion of a monotonous existence. Their table was a celebration of seasonal abundance and clever preservation. The true foundation of every single meal, the absolute staple that filled their stomachs and fueled their labor, was bread. Not the soft, pre-sliced loaves we know today, but a dense, flat, and nourishing disk known as ta. This bread was made from emmer wheat or barley, grains they cultivated in the shaded plots beneath the palms. The process of making it was a daily ritual, usually overseen by the women of the household. The grain was first ground by hand on a saddle quern, a large, flat stone upon which another stone, called a rider, was pushed back and forth to crush the kernels into a coarse, whole grain flour. This flour was then mixed with water and a bit of yeast from a saved piece of the previous day's dough to form a starter. The resulting dough was left to rise before being shaped into rounds and baked, either slapped directly onto the hot walls of a conical clay oven or cooked on a flat griddle over a fire. The bread was hearty, slightly chewy, and had a nutty flavor. It was rarely eaten alone. It was the edible utensil used to scoop up stews, dips, and vegetables. And those vegetables provided the vibrant colors and fresh tastes on their plates. In the rich, well-watered soil of their garden plots, they grew a surprising variety of produce. Onions and garlic were ubiquitous, adding a pungent depth to their cooking. They cultivated cucumbers for their refreshing crunch, lettuce, and leeks. Lentils and chickpeas provided crucial protein and were often boiled into thick, hearty soups and stews. These dishes would be slow cooked in clay pots over a low fire, seasoned with available herbs like cilantro, dill, and cumin, and perhaps enriched with a precious drizzle of date syrup or a splash of vinegar for a sweet and sour tang. A typical midday meal might simply be a bowl of lentil stew and a hunk of fresh bread, a simple yet completely satisfying and nutritious combination. Perhaps the most surprising element of their diet, given their desert surroundings, was the presence of fish. The larger, permanent oasis pools were not just sources of water, they were thriving micro-ecosystems. Tilapia and other native fish species flourished in these waters, and the farmers were adept at harvesting them. Using nets woven from flax or traps made from reeds, they would catch these fish, providing a welcome and excellent source of animal protein. The catch might be grilled fresh over coals for an immediate feast, or more commonly, preserved for later use. Fish could be dried in the sun or salted, allowing the family to enjoy this valuable resource long after it was caught. Meat, however, was a true luxury, reserved for special occasions, religious festivals, or celebrations following a successful harvest. The average family might keep a few goats for milk, which could be fermented into a yogurt-like drink or turned into cheese, but slaughtering one for its meat was a significant event. They might also raise ducks or geese in their courtyards, which provided eggs as a regular source of nutrition and the occasional bird for the pot. Beyond their own livestock, the men might occasionally hunt the desert wildlife that ventured to the oasis's edge for water, such as hares or certain species of antelope, though this was unreliable. When meat was available, it was never wasted. It would be stewed slowly to make it tender and to create a rich broth, ensuring every last bit of nourishment was extracted and shared among the family. To wash it all down, the most common beverage was beer, though it was very different from modern varieties. This ancient Egyptian beer, called heneket, was a thick, cloudy, and nutrient-rich brew made from partially baked barley bread that was crumbled into water and left to ferment. It had a low alcohol content and a sour, porridge-like consistency, and it was consumed by people of all ages and social classes. It was a safe source of hydration. The fermentation process killed pathogens, calories, and vitamins, and it was far more stable than water alone. Of course, fresh, cool water from the spring was always the primary drink, but beer was the celebratory and everyday beverage that added another layer of sustenance to their lives. This diet, born entirely from the oasis, was a testament to their incredible adaptability and deep understanding of how to create a complete and thriving life in the most unexpected of places. Dressing for a day's work in the oasis was an exercise in practical wisdom, a direct response to an environment that offered no second chances against the elements. Every item of clothing served a clear, defensive purpose, engineered over generations to provide maximum protection with minimal discomfort in the oppressive heat. The primary fabric of choice was linen, woven from the flax plant that they likely grew in their own garden plots. This wasn't a stylistic choice, it was one of pure survival physics. Unlike wool, which traps heat, or the cotton that was not yet common, linen's loose weave and natural fibers are exceptionally breathable. They allow air to circulate freely against the skin and wick moisture away from the body with remarkable efficiency, helping the farmer stay dry and significantly cooler even under the blistering sun. The typical garment was a simple, knee-length kilt for men, known as a shendet, often paired with nothing on the torso to facilitate maximum airflow. Women wore simple, straight dresses of linen that were equally airy and practical for their work. These clothes were not dyed in bright colors. They were left in the natural off-white or beige hue of the flax fiber, which had the added benefit of reflecting, rather than absorbing, the sun's intense rays. Perhaps the most critical piece of equipment was the head covering. Working for hours directly under the sun invited heat stroke and sun sickness, so protecting the head and neck was paramount. A standard method involved a simple square of linen cloth, which could be folded and tied in a variety of ways to suit the task at hand. Most commonly, it would be fashioned into a loose turban, wrapping around the head to provide shade for the scalp, temples, and the back of the neck. For even more coverage, one corner of the cloth could be draped down to shield the nape of the neck, an area particularly vulnerable to sunburn. During sandstorms or periods of especially intense wind, this same cloth could be pulled up and across the nose and mouth, acting as a vital filter against the fine, abrasive dust that filled the air. This versatile piece of fabric was as essential as any farming tool, a personal piece of shade that moved with them throughout the day. Footwear presented a unique challenge. The ground could be a mixture of soft, shifting sand, sun-baked hard mud, and sharp palm fronds or stones. Going barefoot was an invitation for cuts, burns, and infections. The solution was a practical and iconic one: sandals, but these were not the flimsy, fashion-oriented sandals we might think of today. Oasis farmers wore sturdy sandals with soles crafted from woven papyrus reeds, or more commonly, palm leaves and fiber. These soles were thick enough to insulate the feet from the scorching heat of the ground, yet remained flexible and lightweight. They were attached to the foot with simple leather or papyrus straps that passed between the big toe and the second toe, and then around the ankle, securing the sole firmly in place without trapping heat around the entire foot. This design allowed for ventilation and quick drying if they had to step through an irrigation channel, while the sturdy sole protected against every sharp obstacle the desert and farm could offer. For the most arduous tasks, like climbing the rough trunks of date palms, these sandals might be temporarily discarded to allow for better grip with the bare foot, but they were always close at hand for the walk home across the hot earth. Beyond the basic garments, farmers employed other simple yet effective tools for protection. A farmer might often be seen with a long, sturdy reed or a wooden staff. This served multiple purposes. It could be used to test the stability of the ground ahead, to gently guide a stray goat back to its pen, or to help bear weight while walking long distances between groves. Most importantly, it was perfect for carefully pushing aside the broad, spiny leaves of the date palm to look for ripe fruit or to check for pests without risking a painful jab from the sharp thorns that line the frond's stem. This constant, mindful interaction with their environment using adaptable, multi-purpose tools and clothing shows a deep and sophisticated understanding of how to not just survive, but to work effectively and safely within their beautiful but demanding oasis world. This deep interdependence, this reliance on shared water and collective harvests, naturally forged oasis communities into something much more than just a cluster of neighboring farms. They evolved into intensely close-knit social units where the line between one family's well-being and the entire village's survival was often blurred. The social structure wasn't built on wealth or royal decrees from a distant pharaoh. It was built on practical necessity and mutual respect. At the heart of every community were the eldest and most experienced farmers, the ones who remembered the great droughts and the seasons of miraculous abundance. These elders formed an informal council, a repository of generational wisdom who would settle disputes over water rights, advise on when to plant or harvest based on subtle environmental cues, and organize the community's response to any major challenge. Their authority wasn't enforced by law, but by the collective acknowledgement of their irreplaceable knowledge. This communal spirit came to life most vividly during the great seasonal events, with the date harvest being the year's pinnacle. When the fruit was ripe, the entire village transformed into a single, coordinated organism. It was all hands on deck. The most agile young men took on the dangerous task of climbing, while teams of women and children worked below, sorting and transporting the heavy strands. Even those who couldn't participate in the physical labor contributed by preparing large communal meals, bringing water to the workers, or tending to the younger children of busy parents. This wasn't seen as working for someone else, it was working for us. The harvest moved from grove to grove in a pre-arranged order, ensuring every family received the same enthusiastic help when their own trees were ready. The success of one was a success for all, as a poor yield for any single farmer meant a weaker overall community. The air during these days was filled not just with the sweet smell of dates, but with laughter, shouted instructions, and songs to keep the rhythm of the work, a powerful symphony of shared purpose. Beyond the harvest, this support system was woven into the fabric of daily life through a beautiful concept known today as reciprocal labor. If a farmer's irrigation channel collapsed, threatening to flood his field or drain precious water, he wouldn't have to face the backbreaking repair alone. He would simply send word, and his neighbors would arrive with shovels and baskets. In return, he was socially and morally obligated to offer his labor when another needed a new roof woven, a new storage silo built, or help planting a new grove of young palm trees. This system created a resilient safety net where no single hardship could ruin a family. It also fostered a profound sense of trust and reciprocity. Your neighbor's full water jar was your security, and your strong back was their insurance. Disputes did happen, of course, usually over the ever-critical allocation of water, but the community had a strong incentive to resolve them quickly and amicably. Letting a feud fester could mean being isolated when you desperately needed help, a risk no one could afford to take. The spiritual and social heart of the village was often the local shrine or a particularly large, shaded public space beneath an ancient, sprawling palm. This was where the community gathered after the sun had lost its fury to share news, discuss village matters, and simply enjoy each other's company. Here, stories were passed down, tales of clever jinn that lived in the desert, legends of the gods who controlled the rain and springs, and heroic accounts of their own ancestors who first settled the oasis. These gatherings reinforced their shared identity and values. Marriages were celebrated here with festivals that could last for days, feasting on stored delicacies and sweet date beer. It was in these moments of shared laughter, story, and song that the oasis truly became a home. It wasn't just the water and the dates that sustained them, it was this unbreakable web of mutual obligation, shared experience, and genuine connection that turned a struggle for survival in the desert into a rich, fulfilling, and deeply human way of life. For the oasis farmer, the line between the earthly and the divine was as thin as the morning mist over the water channels. Their entire existence, every moment of survival and success, was seen not just as a product of their own labor, but as a gift from, and a negotiation with, a host of powerful deities who controlled the invisible forces of nature. Religion was not a separate activity reserved for a certain day of the week. It was woven into the very fabric of their daily toil, a constant, humble conversation with the gods who held the fate of their harvest in their hands. At the center of this spiritual world was a deep and personal devotion to Rinenu-Tet, the powerful goddess of the harvest, nourishment, and the vital act of breastfeeding. To the farmer, she was the divine mother of the oasis itself. She was not a distant, aloof figure in a far-off temple. Her spirit was present in the very soil they tilled, in the sap of the date palm, and in the ripening fruit that promised another year of life. They saw her benevolent hand in the successful germination of a seed, in the plumpness of a date, and in the health of their children who thrived on the food she provided. Small shrines to Rinenu-Tet, perhaps just a simple niche in a wall holding a crudely carved statue or a symbolic offering of a perfect sheaf of grain, would have been a common sight in their homes and fields. Before a meal, a farmer might silently offer a crumb of bread or a drop of beer in her name, a quick gesture of thanks for her continued sustenance. Her presence was a comforting one, a spiritual guarantee that their hard work would not be in vain. This devotion reached its peak during the critical moments of the agricultural calendar. The act of pollination, that delicate and human-assisted union of male and female flowers, was not merely a technical chore, it was a ritual performed under the watchful eye of the goddess. A farmer climbing a palm to dust the pollen might whisper a short prayer to Rinenu-Tet, asking for her blessing to ensure the pollen took hold and the fruit would set. The first fruits of any harvest were never simply consumed. The very finest dates, the most perfect bunch of grapes, or the largest head of grain were set aside as a first fruits offering. This was the best of the best, the choicest portion of their labors, given back to the gods in a profound act of gratitude and reciprocity. It was a sacrifice made in the hopeful belief that by generously giving the first and finest, the gods would ensure the remainder of the harvest was abundant and that they would be blessed again in the seasons to come. Beyond Renenutet, the farmer's spiritual landscape was populated by other deities who governed the elements essential to his survival. There was Hapi, the god of the annual Nile inundation. While the oasis farmer did not see the Nile's flood directly, he understood that the same divine force that filled the great river also fed the deep aquifers that gave life to his spring. Prayers to Hapi were prayers for the water table to remain high and the spring to flow eternally. Then there was Osiris, the great god of death and resurrection, whose mythic cycle of being cut down and reborn mirrored the agricultural cycle perfectly. The sowing of a seed into the dark earth was an echo of Osiris's burial, and the green shoot breaking through the soil was a symbol of his triumphant return to life. This connection gave the farmer's work a cosmic significance. Each season, he was not just growing food, he was participating in the eternal, divine cycle of death and rebirth that ordered the entire universe. His labor was a sacred act that helped maintain the balance of the world, or Mat, ensuring that life would continue to triumph over chaos just as Osiris did. This belief transformed the exhausting, sun-baked work of irrigation and harvest from a mere struggle for survival into a holy duty, a partnership with the gods themselves to keep the world alive and in harmony. While the oasis was a world of self-sufficiency, it was never an isolated one. The very abundance that the farmer and his family worked so hard to create opened a door to the wider world of ancient Egypt, transforming their surplus dates into a powerful economic engine. This trade wasn't a luxury, it was a critical component of their survival strategy, a means of acquiring the essential goods that their isolated paradise simply could not provide. Through trade, the humble date farmer became a vital link in a sprawling economic network that stretched from the deepest desert all the way to the bustling markets of the Nile. The currency of this trade was not gold or silver, but the processed products of their labor. A single family might consume a significant portion of their own harvest, but a thriving grove of mature palms produced a tremendous surplus. This excess was carefully converted into its most durable and transportable forms: sacks of sun-dried dates, dense bricks of pressed date cake, and sealed amphorae of rich, dark date syrup. These were the goods that could withstand the long, arduous journey across the desert without spoiling, their value concentrated, and their shelf life nearly indefinite. A caravan merchant wasn't interested in a fragile basket of fresh fruit. He sought the stable, high-calorie commodities that could be stored in a ship's hold or a warehouse for months and still command a high price. The primary trade route for an oasis like Karga or Dakka was the legendary Darb el Arbain, the 40 Days Road. This wasn't a single paved path, but a network of ancient tracks that connected the lush oases of the western desert to the Nile Valley. Once or twice a year, depending on the season, the quiet rhythm of the oasis would be interrupted by the arrival of these desert caravans. The sight would be incredible: a long line of donkeys and later camels laden with goods, accompanied by dusty traders who knew the desert's secrets intimately. They came not just for dates, but for the other unique products of the oasis: its grapes, its medicinal herbs, and its natron salt. But the dates were always the star of the show. At the oasis's trading post, a lively negotiation would unfold. The farmer, often dealing through a community representative or a local elder who understood broader market values, would barter his stored goods. In return, he sought the things his family needed to thrive. He might trade several amphorae of syrup for a new copper sickle or axe head, its sharp, durable metal far superior to his stone tools. Baskets of dried dates could be exchanged for fine, soft linen from the Nile Valley, a welcome comfort compared to their own rough spun cloth. They coveted the beautiful, functional pottery produced by specialized Nile workshops, large storage jars, elegant bowls, and cups that were far more refined than their own handmade ceramics. Other highly sought-after items included high-quality grain to supplement their own harvest or for variety in their diet, papyrus for scrolls and paperwork, precious oils for perfumes and medicine, and even luxury items like small amounts of honey or exotic woods for carving. This exchange was about more than just material goods. It was an exchange of information and culture. The caravan masters were the internet of the ancient world, bringing news from the capital, gossip from distant cities, and reports on Nile flood levels that could predict the economic health of the entire kingdom. They might bring new musical instruments, stories of foreign gods, or innovative ideas for tool design that the oasis craftsmen could then adopt and adapt. The farmer, in turn, could share his deep knowledge of the desert, its hidden water sources, and its safe paths, information that was priceless to the merchants. This symbiotic relationship meant that while the oasis dwellers lived in geographic isolation, they were never culturally or economically disconnected. They were active, engaged participants in the flow of Egyptian civilization, their sweet harvest fueling not just their own families but the broader economy, connecting the heart of the desert to the pulse of the Nile. But to turn this vision into a working farm, the oasis dweller relied on a carefully curated set of tools, each one a masterpiece of practical design born from generations of trial and error in the desert. Their toolkit was a testament to ingenuity, making the absolute most of the limited materials available to them. The primary resources were all around: wood from the date palms and acacia trees that managed to grow in the harsher outskirts, stone gathered from the desert floor, and animal products like leather and bone. With these humble ingredients, they crafted the implements that allowed them to bend their fragile environment to their will. One of the most vital and frequently used tools was a simple, curved blade known as the sickle. While we might picture a metal tool for much of ancient Egyptian history, the cutting edge was made of something far more fascinating: sharp-edged flakes of chert or flint, meticulously chipped into a crescent shape and then set into a wooden or bone handle using a sticky adhesive like tree resin or bitumen. This serrated, razor-sharp edge was perfectly designed for the rapid, sawing motion needed to harvest stalks of emmer wheat and barley from their garden plots. Later, as metalworking advanced, copper, and eventually bronze, sickles became more common, their durable, single-piece construction making them a prized possession for any farming family. The rhythmic sound of the sickle swishing through grain was the sound of survival, of securing the bread that was the foundation of every meal. For preparing the soil in their shaded gardens, the farmers used a surprisingly effective tool, the wooden hoe. This was about as simple as a tool could get, little more than a sturdy, flat piece of wood, often from a tamarisk or acacia branch, lashed at a right angle to a long handle. Despite its simplicity, it was incredibly versatile. The farmer could use it to break up the sun-baked crust of the earth before planting, to carefully create the small furrows needed for irrigation channels, or to hill soil around the base of young vegetable plants. For larger tasks like turning over a bigger plot of land, they might have employed a light, ox-drawn plow made of wood. However, in the confined, shaded spaces beneath the palm canopy, the humble hand-held hoe was the true workhorse, an extension of the farmer's own strength and patience. Containers were everything in the oasis economy, and the skill of weaving was as essential as that of farming itself. Using the long, flexible leaves of the date palm, the women of the family would weave an entire universe of containers. They created shallow, wide winnowing baskets for tossing threshed grain into the air, letting the breeze carry away the lightweight chaff while the heavier kernels fell back into the basket. They made deep, sturdy carrying baskets with rope handles for transporting the harvested date strands from the grove to the processing area. They even wove intricate, tight weave mats that served as portable drying floors for the dates themselves, allowing air to circulate while keeping the precious fruit clean and off the bare ground. This weaving technology was lightweight, repairable, and made from a completely renewable resource, the very definition of sustainable design, yet their most profound technological triumph was in water management, and the shaduf was just the beginning. In some of the larger oases, evidence suggests they may have used an even more ingenious device, the sakia, or water wheel. This was a far more complex machine, a large, vertical wheel made of wood with clay pots or buckets attached to its rim. It was typically turned by a blindfolded ox or donkey walking in a circle, which would cause the wheel to rotate. As it turned, the pots on the rim would dip down into the water source, fill up, and then be lifted to the top of the wheel, where they would automatically tip their contents into a waiting irrigation channel. This system could lift vast quantities of water to a much greater height than a shaduf with far less human effort, allowing them to irrigate larger and higher plots of land. The groan and splash of the sakia would have been the sound of abundance, a slow, rhythmic testament to their ability to harness animal power to work in harmony with the relentless demands of the desert. For the oasis farmer, the changing seasons were not marked by falling leaves or blooming flowers as we know them, but by a far more profound and reliable rhythm, the distant, yet deeply felt, pulse of the Nile River. Even hundreds of miles from its banks, the great river's annual cycle was the invisible metronome that set the pace for every single activity in their isolated world. Their entire agricultural calendar was a sophisticated act of remote synchronization, an understanding that their desert spring and the Nile's flood were two halves of a single, life-giving system. The year was divided into 3 distinct seasons, each with its own deity, its own labors, and its own unique character, all flowing from the rise and fall of the distant waters. The first and most crucial season was Akhit, the inundation. This period, lasting from roughly July to November, was when the Nile would burst its banks, spreading rich, black silt across the floodplain. In the oasis, the farmers would not see this flood, but they knew it was happening. They tracked its progress through the caravan traders who arrived with news from the valley, bearing reports on the flood's height and strength. A high flood in the Nile meant the aquifers deep beneath their feet were being replenished, ensuring their spring would flow strongly and consistently for the year to come. This was a season of profound, nervous hope, while their counterparts in the Nile Valley waited for the waters to recede to begin planting. The oasis farmers were already busy. Akhit was their primary growing season, with the sun at its most intense, but with the secure knowledge of ample water, this was the time for sowing the grains, emmer, wheat, and barley, in the shaded plots beneath the palms. It was also the period for tending to the vegetables and for the critical work of maintaining and expanding the all-important irrigation network, ensuring every channel was clear and ready to distribute the bounty provided by the distant, unseen flood. As the Nile's waters receded, leaving behind the fertile black earth that gave the next season its name, the oasis entered Perit, the season of emergence, running from November to March. This was the true heart of the agricultural year, a period of explosive growth and non-stop activity. The temperatures in the desert became far more tolerable, with cool nights and warm, sunny days creating ideal conditions for crops to thrive. The grain sown during Akhit would now shoot up, requiring constant weeding and protection from birds. This was also the window for planting and nurturing other crops like lentils, chickpeas, onions, and cucumbers. But the most significant event of Perit was the flowering of the date palms. This brief, delicate window demanded the farmer's complete attention. The entire community would focus on the meticulous, time-sensitive task of hand pollination, climbing the male trees to collect the precious pollen and carefully transferring it to the female flowers. The success of this operation, carried out under the gentle winter sun, would directly determine the abundance or failure of the autumn harvest. Every day was packed with purposeful labor, from the pre-dawn irrigation checks to the evening repairs of tools, all under the comfortable desert winter sky. The final season was Shemu, the drought or harvest, stretching from March to July. This was the culmination of the entire year's effort, a time of intense, joyous, and exhausting work as the desert heat began to climb to its fierce peak. The barley and wheat were the first to be ready, cut down with flint sickles and threshed by donkeys trampling the stalks on a hard, packed courtyard floor. But the grand event was the date harvest. The previously pollinated flowers had now transformed into heavy, golden brown clusters of fruit, weighing down the branches of the palms. The community would mobilize into a single harvesting unit, with climbers scaling the trees, ground crews catching the heavy strands, and processing teams swiftly sorting, drying, and packing the precious crop. Shemu was a race against the escalating heat and the ever-present threat of spoilage. As the sun beat down with increasing fury, the work had to be done with efficient speed. Once the harvest was secure, stored in pottery jars and woven baskets, the relentless summer heat truly set in. The season closed with a gradual slowing of pace. With the major crops gathered, attention turned to preserving the food, repairing tools and homes, and waiting out the worst of the heat, all while keeping a watchful eye on the water levels in the spring, patiently awaiting the signs that would herald the start of a new cycle and the return of Akhit once again. Yet for all their ingenuity and deep connection to the land, life in the oasis was a perpetual negotiation with danger, a constant vigil against forces that could undo a year's labor in a matter of days. The farmer's existence was defined not just by the rhythm of the seasons, but by a relentless series of threats that demanded resilience, adaptation, and a profound understanding of their fragile environment. Their greatest skill was not merely cultivation, but prediction and prevention, reading the subtle signs of the desert to protect their hard-won paradise. The most dramatic and immediate threat was the haboob, the violent sandstorm that could descend with terrifying speed. One moment the sky would be a clear, brilliant blue. The next, a monstrous, advancing wall of reddish-brown dust would blot out the sun, turning day into an eerie, choking twilight. These storms were not mere inconveniences, they were existential assaults. The wind-driven sand was a fine, abrasive powder that could strip the tender leaves from young plants, scar the bark of the date palms, and worst of all, silently bury the life-giving irrigation channels under feet of shifting dunes. A major storm could completely erase the landscape of their labor, filling canals and covering young crops in a suffocating blanket. Their strategy was a mix of preparation and hard, reactive labor. They learned to read the signs: a sudden drop in pressure, a specific quality to the silence, the behavior of animals giving them precious minutes to secure tools, bring livestock into sheltered pens, and retreat to the safety of their thick-walled homes. After the storm passed, the entire community would emerge, not with despair, but with shovels and baskets in hand, to begin the Sisyphean task of digging out the channels once more, knowing this was simply the price of living in the land they loved. A far more insidious and constant fear was the threat of water scarcity. While the spring seemed eternal, every farmer knew in his bones that it was a finite gift. A long-term decline in the water table, perhaps due to a multi-year drought in the distant Nile Valley that failed to replenish the aquifers, would reveal itself slowly. The spring's flow might become a little weaker, the pool a little shallower. This was a slow-burning emergency that required immediate and difficult choices. The community's water allocation rules would become strictly enforced, with elders carefully monitoring usage. Farmers might have to make the heartbreaking decision to sacrifice some of their less vital crops, a plot of vegetables, or a young, non-fruiting treat to prioritize every precious drop for the mature date palms, the foundation of their entire economy. They became masters of conservation, using every drop with maximum efficiency and constantly maintaining their irrigation systems to eliminate any loss through leaks or evaporation. Their survival depended on this collective discipline, a shared understanding that wasting water was a crime against the entire community. Even with perfect water management, the crops themselves were vulnerable to invisible enemies. Blight and pests could strike without warning. A fungus, encouraged by a period of unusual humidity, could turn a healthy cluster of dates into a rotten, blackened mess. Insects bored into the trunks of the palms, weakening them from the inside. Locusts, though rare, could descend in a biblical plague, devouring every green leaf in sight. Without modern pesticides, their strategies were based on keen observation and natural remedies. They might apply mixtures of ash and water to deter insects, or carefully remove and burn infected branches to stop the spread of disease. They practiced crop rotation in their garden plots to keep the soil healthy and break pest cycles. Most importantly, they cultivated biodiversity. By growing many different types of plants together, they created an ecosystem where predator insects could help control pest populations and where the failure of one crop wouldn't mean total disaster. This diversity was their organic shield, a resilient web of life that could withstand shocks far better than a single, vast monoculture. Perhaps the most personal and feared danger was the risk of injury. A fall from a tall date palm could mean death or debilitating injury, leaving a family without its primary laborer. A misstep with a sharp harvesting knife could cause a wound that quickly became infected in the dusty environment. There were snakes and scorpions hiding in the cool shade of the groves. For these, they relied on a deep knowledge of first aid and herbal medicine passed down through generations. They knew how to set bones, bind wounds with clean linen, and poultice infections with specific plants, but they also understood their limits. A severely injured person would require the expertise of a traveling healer or a desperate journey to a larger town, if one was even possible. This ever-present physical risk added a layer of solemnity to their work, a quiet acknowledgement of the fragility of their own bodies against the immense, powerful world they tended. Each successful day that ended without crisis was a small victory, a testament to their skill, their caution, and their unwavering cooperation in the face of the desert's many challenges. This vibrant island of green, teeming with water and food, was a powerful beacon for the desert's wildlife, making the farmer's world a shared space of both beneficial partnerships and dangerous confrontations. Far from a sterile orchard, the oasis was a thriving ecosystem, and the farmer was a constant participant in its complex web of life, learning to encourage his allies and defend against his adversaries with a deep, practical wisdom. His relationship with these creatures was a daily reality, a balance between harnessing their power and protecting his home from their threats. Among the most welcome visitors were the bees, drawn by the countless fragrant blossoms of the date palms and other flowering plants. Their constant humming industry was a sound the farmer listened for with hope. While he manually pollinated his prized date palms to guarantee a harvest, he understood that these tiny, buzzing workers were performing the same essential service for the rest of his crops: the cucumbers, the melons, the fruit trees. Their presence significantly increased the yield of his entire garden, and they offered a sweet bonus. A skilled farmer knew how to find their hives, often nestled in the hollows of old palms or rocky outcrops at the oasis edge, and would carefully harvest a portion of their honeycomb, a rare and luxurious treat that provided valuable sugars and medicinal properties. He saw them not as pests, but as unseen partners, their labor directly contributing to the abundance on his table. The oasis pools and canals also hosted their own vital residents. Tilapia and other small fish darted through the water, and while they were a food source, they also played a crucial role in the ecosystem. They fed on insect larvae and algae, helping to keep the water clean and clear, reducing the spread of waterborne pests like mosquitoes. Ducks and geese, which many families kept, would paddle in the channels, their constant dabbling further aerating the water and controlling unwanted weeds and insects. Even the frogs that emerged at dusk, filling the evening with their croaking chorus, were valued allies, consuming vast quantities of flies and other bothersome insects that could otherwise plague the household and the crops. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a classic example of a symbiotic relationship where the farmer's managed environment naturally attracted species that helped maintain its health and productivity. But for every ally, there was a potential threat lurking in the dappled shade. The same cool, damp conditions that nurtured the crops also created perfect hiding spots for some of the desert's most dangerous inhabitants. Scorpions were a constant and serious concern. They sought shelter under the very stones used to line the irrigation channels, nestled in piles of harvested palm fronds, and could even find their way into the cool, dark interior of the home, hiding in sandals or among stored baskets. Their sting was excruciatingly painful and could be fatal to a young child or an elderly person. The farmer and his family developed a habitual caution, always shaking out their footwear and using a stick to overturn rocks or debris before reaching with their bare hands. Their vigilance was a necessary defense against an ever-present danger. Equally feared were the snakes that slithered into the oasis for water and to hunt the rodents that were attracted to the grain stores. While most were harmless, the presence of venomous species like the cobra or the horned viper meant every encounter was treated with extreme caution. Spotting the distinctive glide of a serpent through the barley or hearing the sudden rustle in a date palm's crown would bring all work to an immediate halt. The farmer's long staff, used for guiding animals and testing the ground, became a vital tool for gently guiding these unwelcome guests away from the living and working areas, preferably back into the surrounding desert. They understood that the snake was not an evil invader but a part of the natural order, yet they also knew that coexistence required a respectful distance and a clear understanding of boundaries. Perhaps the most frustrating adversaries were the birds and small mammals that saw the farmer's ripening harvest as their own personal buffet. Flocks of small birds could descend on a fruiting fig tree or a patch of grain, devouring weeks of growth in a matter of hours. Jerboas and other desert rodents would tunnel into garden plots, nibbling on roots and stems, or worse, find their way into the storerooms to contaminate precious reserves of grain and dried dates. To combat these thieves, the farmers employed a mix of clever tactics and constant vigilance. Children might be posted as scarecrows, tasked with shouting and waving sticks to chase birds away during the critical ripening period. They wove intricate nets from palm fibers to drape over particularly valuable fruit trees. They stored their grain in thick, sealed pottery jars that no rodent could penetrate, and they often kept a family cat, a highly valued pet whose primary job was to patrol the storage areas and keep the mouse population firmly in check. This ongoing battle for the fruits of their labor was a never-ending part of the oasis rhythm, a reminder that their paradise was a contested ground and that their survival depended on a keen eye and a clever strategy to outwit nature's many opportunists. Living in such an isolated environment meant the oasis farmer couldn't rely on a physician from the nearest city. He had to be the master of his own family's well-being, drawing on a deep, generational knowledge of the natural pharmacy that flourished right outside his door. This medical wisdom was a practical science, born from centuries of careful observation and experimentation with the plants, minerals, and even animal products the desert provided. Every member of the family, from a very young age, learned to identify which herb could soothe a burn, which root could settle an upset stomach, and which berry was best avoided. This wasn't abstract knowledge, it was a vital survival skill, as effective as knowing how to channel water or harvest dates, and it was woven into the daily rhythm of oasis life. The date palm itself was far more than a food source, it was the cornerstone of their medicine chest. They understood the fruit's incredible nutritional power intuitively, using it as a primary remedy for weakness and exhaustion. A worker feeling faint from the heat would be given a handful of dates and water to quickly restore their energy, a practice we now know is effective due to the fruit's perfect blend of natural sugars, potassium, and electrolytes. But their use went far deeper. Date syrup, that rich, dark liquid, was a valued base for more complex medicines. Its thick, sweet consistency was perfect for masking the bitter taste of potent herbs, making remedies palatable for sick children. They also believed in its ability to soothe sore throats and coughs. A small spoonful of syrup mixed with hot water and perhaps a touch of thyme was a common treatment for respiratory complaints. Even the date seed wasn't wasted. Once dried and ground into a fine powder, it was sometimes used as an abrasive ingredient in pastes meant to clean teeth or as a base for other medicinal compounds, ensuring every part of their miraculous tree served a purpose in sustaining life. Beyond the palm, the oasis garden was a cultivated apothecary. In the shaded plots between the trees, farmers grew a host of plants with known healing properties. Coriander wasn't just a seasoning, its seeds were chewed or brewed into a tea to ease digestive discomfort and relieve gas. Cumin was valued not only for its flavor, but also as an antiseptic. Ground cumin could be applied to minor cuts to prevent infection. Garlic was consumed in large quantities, believed to grant strength and ward off illness, while onions were used for their anti-inflammatory properties. Flax, grown for its linen fibers, also produced linseeds. When soaked in water, these seeds released a thick, mucilaginous gel that was applied as a poultice to soothe burns, wounds, and skin irritations, creating a protective, cooling barrier. A farmer with a deep cut would have the wound cleaned with clean water or maybe a mild vinegar solution, packed with a healing poultice of crushed herbs, and then bound with a strip of clean linen, a complete medical procedure using nothing but what was on hand. For more serious ailments, they turned to the wilder edges of the oasis and the desert beyond, possessing an encyclopedic knowledge of which wild plants could heal and which could harm. The leaves of the acacia tree, boiled into a solution, created a powerful astringent used to treat skin diseases and inflammation. The gum from the same tree, what we know as gum arabic, was dissolved in water to make a soothing drink for coughs and sore throats, coating the irritation with its smooth texture. They knew where to find specific desert succulents whose sap could be used to treat warts or soothe burns. Minerals played a role too. The natron salt harvested from dry lake beds on the oasis periphery was not just for preserving fish and mummification. It was dissolved in water as a disinfectant mouthwash or gargle and was sometimes applied in pastes to treat skin conditions. This deep environmental knowledge meant a simple walk through the groves was like browsing a well-stocked dispensary, with every shrub, tree, and pool holding potential remedies for the challenges of life and health. The wisdom of the oasis was far too precious to be written down on fragile papyrus that could crumble to dust. It was stored in something far more durable and portable, the minds of the elders and the daily rhythms of family life. This vast library of practical knowledge, from predicting a sandstorm by the behavior of the birds to knowing the exact moment a date cluster was ripe for picking, was transferred from one generation to the next through a living, breathing education system built on observation, imitation, and shared experience. A child's schooling didn't happen in a separate room with scrolls and lectures. It unfolded under the dappled shade of the palm groves, in the rich earth of the garden plots, and beside the gurgling irrigation channels, with the whole world as their classroom and every adult as a potential teacher. This education began almost as soon as a toddler could walk and follow a parent into the fields. The first and most powerful teaching method was simple, constant observation. A young boy would trail behind his father as he made his morning rounds, silently watching the way he ran a handful of soil through his fingers to test its moisture, or how he gently lifted a leaf to check for pests on its underside. A girl would sit beside her mother as she sorted dates, absorbing the subtle visual and tactile cues that distinguished a fruit prime for drying from one best eaten fresh. This passive absorption was the foundation. Children learned the language of the land before they even understood the words for it, the smell of water on dry air, the sound of a healthy palm frond rustling in the wind, the feel of the right consistency of mud for brickmaking. This immersive exposure wired their brains to think like farmers, to see the oasis not as a collection of individual plants, but as a single, interconnected organism whose health needed to be constantly monitored. As they grew older, this shifted from passive observation to guided practice, a hands-on apprenticeship where skills were built one small, manageable task at a time. A father wouldn't simply hand his son a knife and point him toward a 50-foot palm. The training was incremental and deeply safety-conscious. A young boy might start by being entrusted with the important job of holding the rope steady at the base of a tree while his father climbed. Then he might graduate to clearing silt from the easily accessible sections of the irrigation ditch. His first attempt at using a flint sickle would be on a small, designated patch of barley under the watchful eye of his grandfather. Each successful task built confidence and muscle memory. For a girl, her mother might first give her a single perfect date and a pot of water and show her how to gently wash it without bruising the fruit. Then she might be allowed to stir the date syrup as it simmered over a low fire, learning to identify the precise change in the sound of the bubbles that signaled it was nearing readiness. Mistakes were expected and were seen as a vital part of the learning process, a chance for a gentle correction and a story about why a certain way was better. Woven throughout this practical training were the oral traditions, the stories, songs, and proverbs that acted as mnemonic devices, packaging complex information into memorable, easily transmitted bundles. A grandfather repairing a woven basket with his grandson wouldn't just show him the stitch. He might tell a story about the time a poorly woven basket broke during a harvest, scattering a family's precious dates across the sand and teaching everyone the importance of taking time to do things right. The community likely had songs for specific tasks, rhythmic work chants for pulling water with the shaduf that made the labor feel lighter and ensured a steady, efficient pace. Proverbs were a form of condensed wisdom. A lazy hand invites the sand into the canal, or the best time to plant a palm was 20 years ago, the second best time is today. These sayings were repeated constantly, their lessons becoming ingrained moral and practical codes that guided decision-making for a lifetime. This oral history also preserved crucial long-term environmental knowledge that an individual might not see in their own lifespan, like tales of the Great Drought that happened 3 generations prior, detailing the survival strategies that worked and the warning signs that preceded it. Certain advanced, proprietary knowledge was often guarded within families, much like a master craftsman's secret techniques. The exact ratio for a particularly effective natural pesticide, made from crushed herbs and specific minerals, might be a closely held secret passed from a mother to her daughter on her wedding day. A family might have discovered a particularly successful method for grafting a branch from a high-yielding palm onto a stronger rootstock, a technique that gave them a slight but valuable edge in the quality of their fruit, and they would protect that knowledge fiercely. This wasn't seen as selfishness, but as preserving a hard-won advantage that ensured their lineage's continued prosperity. This specialized knowledge was the culmination of a lifelong education, the final key handed over only when the teacher was certain the student possessed not just the skill, but the wisdom and responsibility to use it well for the benefit of their own future family, continuing the unbroken chain of oasis life. Even in their remote haven, the long arm of the pharaoh's administration eventually reached the oasis farmer, a reminder that their world, however isolated, was an integral part of the great machine of the Egyptian state. The relationship with the pharaoh's officials was not one of daily oppression, but a structured, predictable, and often burdensome interaction centered on one inescapable reality: the obligation to pay taxes. For the farmer, the annual visit of the royal scribe and his entourage was the most direct and consequential point of contact with the vast hierarchy that ruled from the distant Nile. This official, often traveling with a small contingent of guards and assistants, represented the absolute power and divine authority of the king himself. His arrival was a moment of both reverence and anxiety, a day of reckoning for the entire year's labor. The process was meticulous and ruthlessly efficient, a testament to the bureaucratic brilliance of ancient Egypt. The scribe would set up his portable writing kit, a palette with cakes of red and black ink, a container of water for mixing, and a supply of red brushes in a shaded, central area of the community. One by one, each farmer would present the fruits of his harvest. The scribe's trained eye would quickly assess the quantity and quality of the dates, grain, and other goods, while an assistant used a standardized set of bronze weights and balance scales to make precise measurements. Every transaction was carefully recorded on a fresh sheet of papyrus. The farmer's heart might sink as he watched the scribe's brush swiftly mark down the amounts, knowing that a significant portion of what his family had sweated for was now officially claimed by the state. The tax rate was not arbitrary. It was a fixed percentage of the estimated yield, calculated by the scribe based on the size of the landholding and the apparent success of the harvest. A good year meant a larger absolute tribute, but it also left the farmer with a more comfortable surplus. A poor harvest, however, did not necessarily mean a reprieve. The tax burden could push a family to the very brink of survival. The date, in all its preserved forms, was the primary currency of this transaction. While grain was also vital, the unique value of the oasis lay in its ability to produce this luxurious, calorie-dense, and non-perishable commodity. Sacks of sun-dried dates, bricks of pressed date cake, and sealed jars of precious date syrup were the items most sought after by the tax collector. These products were perfectly suited for the state's needs. They could be loaded onto donkeys and transported across the desert without spoiling, stored for years in royal granaries as a strategic food reserve, and distributed as rations to the armies, laborers on state projects, and the vast court bureaucracy. The humble date from a remote farm might eventually sweeten the bread of a soldier guarding the frontiers or fuel the workers building a pharaoh's tomb. By paying their taxes in dates, the oasis farmers were directly contributing to the stability, military power, and economic wealth of the kingdom, a fact that likely gave them a sense of participation, even from the periphery. Beyond the simple extraction of wealth, this system also integrated the oasis into the broader Egyptian economy in a profound way. The goods collected were not all consumed locally. They entered into a complex system of redistribution. The state would often use this accumulated wealth to pay its own employees, who could then use it to acquire other goods. More importantly for the oasis dwellers, the presence of the royal officials also represented their main access to the coveted manufactured goods of the Nile Valley. While the primary purpose of the visit was collection, the officials' caravan would also be laden with items for trade or as payment for exceptional service. A farmer who had consistently provided a high-quality yield might be rewarded with a new copper axe head, a length of fine linen, or a beautifully made piece of pottery from a royal workshop. This created a subtle incentive. Excelling in one's duty to the state could yield tangible improvements in one's own standard of living. It was a carefully managed cycle. The state took the raw agricultural wealth and returned finished, high-value goods, binding the remote producer to the central authority through a relationship of mutual, if unequal, exchange. Ultimately, the oasis farmer occupied a unique and somewhat ambiguous place in Egypt's rigid social hierarchy. He was not a wealthy noble living off the labor of others, nor was he a landless peasant toiling on someone else's estate. He was a free man, a landholder whose prosperity was directly tied to his own skill and effort. This afforded him a level of dignity and autonomy that many in the Nile Valley did not enjoy. Yet he was also unquestionably at the bottom of the official state hierarchy, a producer whose surplus was obligated to those above him. His life was one of hard-earned self-sufficiency, punctuated by the demands of a distant king. He likely viewed the tax collector with a mixture of respect for his authority and resentment for the wealth he carried away, but he also understood this relationship as a fundamental part of the cosmic order, Mat. Just as he made offerings to the goddess Renenutet to ensure a good harvest, paying his taxes to the pharaoh, the living god on earth, was a duty that helped maintain the balance of the entire world. His contribution, measured out in baskets of dried fruit, was his small but essential part in upholding the civilization of which he was a proud, if far-flung, member. After the final storage jar was sealed and the last of the dates were safely tucked away, a palpable shift in energy swept through the oasis. The intense, focused urgency of the harvest gave way to a collective exhalation of relief and triumph. This was the moment the entire community had worked toward, not just for the season, but for the entire year. The successful harvest was the ultimate validation of their skill, their resilience, and their cooperation, and it was a victory that demanded to be celebrated not quietly, but with a joyous, communal fervor that echoed across the sands. The most important festival of their year was about to begin, the Festival of the Harvest, a multi-day outpouring of gratitude, feasting, and reaffirmation of the bonds that made their lives not just possible, but profoundly meaningful. The preparations for the festival were a community effort in itself, transforming the central gathering space beneath the ancient palms. The women took the lead, organizing teams to grind an extraordinary amount of grain for the festival bread, which would be lighter and finer than their daily ta. They baked not in their individual home ovens, but in the large communal ones, the air thick with the comforting smell of roasting grain. The men built temporary roasting pits, where the meat from a few specially slaughtered goats and the fish netted from the springs would be cooked. But the true stars of the feast were, of course, the dates. The previous year's carefully preserved stores were opened, and the finest of the fresh harvest, those deemed too perfect to dry, were arranged on platters. The syrup, that liquid gold, was drizzled over everything, and large vats of sweet, potent date beer were brought out, their fermentation carefully timed to be ready for this exact occasion. As the sun began to set on the first evening, the entire community, men, women, children, and the revered elders gathered in the torch-lit central space. The feast was a spectacle of abundance, a direct and visceral contrast to the careful rationing that often characterized daily life. There were platters heaped with grilled fish, bowls of savory stew enriched with precious meat, baskets of the special festival bread, and everywhere, overflowing bowls of glistening dates, sticky cakes, and jars of syrup. To eat this food together was an act of profound communion. It was a physical reminder that their shared labor had directly resulted in this shared abundance. An elder would often offer the first formal thanks to the goddess Renenutet, placing a perfect date and a piece of bread on a small altar, formally acknowledging the divine partnership in their success before the human celebration could truly begin. With bellies full, the festival would transition into its second act, music, storytelling, and dance. Musicians would play rhythmic beats on simple drums and shake systems, their metallic jingles cutting through the night air. This was not passive entertainment, it was an invitation for everyone to participate. Stories were told, not just any stories, but specific ones. The elders would recount the tale of a past harvest that was nearly lost to a sudden sandstorm, highlighting the quick thinking of a young farmer who saved the day, a story that served as both history lesson and a celebration of individual courage that benefited the whole. Younger members might perform a playful, exaggerated skit reenacting the pollination process or the frantic race to catch falling date strands, drawing laughter and strengthening the shared identity of everyone who had lived through those same experiences. The laughter and music were a vital release valve, washing away the accumulated stress and exhaustion of the previous weeks and replacing it with a powerful sense of collective achievement and joy. For the young people of the Oasis, these festivals were more than just a party, they were a crucial social arena. With the strict demands of the harvest over, there was time for interaction and courtship. Young men might demonstrate their strength and agility in friendly wrestling matches or climbing contests, while young women and men could mingle more freely, sharing food and conversation under the watchful but approving eyes of the community. These gatherings were a primary way for future partnerships to form, ensuring that the next generation of Oasis families would be built on connections that were celebrated and supported by everyone. A marriage that began with a meeting at the harvest festival was seen as blessed by the prosperity and goodwill of the season itself. Ultimately, the festival's greatest purpose was the reinforcement of the social fabric. In a world where survival depended on unquestioning cooperation, these celebrations were a powerful ritual that renewed the unspoken contracts between neighbors. Sharing food from the same platter, dancing to the same drumbeat, and laughing at the same stories all acted to smooth over any minor tensions that had arisen during the year's work. It reminded everyone that they were not just a random collection of families living in proximity, but a single, interdependent organism. The joy of the festival was the joy of survival itself, a defiant and grateful shout into the vast silence of the desert, affirming that through their unity, skill, and shared purpose, they had once again not only endured, but truly thrived. For a long time, the life of the Oasis farmer was a story told only through ancient texts and logical deduction, but how do we move from theory to tangible truth? The answer lies buried in the sand, waiting for the careful hands of archaeologists to bring it back into the light. The physical evidence recovered from Oasis sites like Karga and Dakta doesn't just confirm the historical record, it adds breathtaking detail, texture, and even the fingerprints of the people who lived this life millennia ago. These aren't merely artifacts, they are direct messages from the past, each one adding a piece to the puzzle of their daily existence. Perhaps the most intimate finds are the humble, yet indispensable, tools of their trade. Excavations have uncovered the very stone sickles they used to harvest grain, their chert or flint blades still securely set into curved wooden handles with ancient resin. Holding one, you can almost feel the ghost of the calluses it created, see the rhythmic swishing motion through a field of barley. We've found the simple wooden hoes, their working ends worn smooth and angled from years of breaking up the soil and carving irrigation channels. But the most evocative tools are those related to the date palm itself. At sites like Ain el-Jedida in the Dakhla Oasis, archaeologists have discovered long, sturdy poles made from palm wood, their tips often fire-hardened. These were the universal tools of the farmer, used to gently pull down high branches for harvesting, to push aside spiny fronds, or to test the stability of the ground ahead. To see one is to see the farmer leaning on it for a moment's rest, shaded by the very trees it helped him cultivate. Then there are the incredible discoveries that seem to defy time itself. In the hyper-arid, perfect conditions of the desert, organic materials that would have rotted away anywhere else in the world are miraculously preserved. Archaeologists have found actual bundles of dried dates, their surfaces shriveled but still recognizable, stored in pottery jars exactly as the farmer's family left them. We have fragments of the woven palm frond baskets they used for everything from carrying the harvest to winnowing grain. We've even recovered sections of the intricate rope they fashioned from palm fiber, its twists and knots still intact, the very same rope they used to scale the trees and lower the heavy date clusters. This isn't just evidence of what they ate or used, it's a direct link to their technology, their craftsmanship, and their incredible skill in utilizing every single part of their environment without waste. The most compelling evidence, however, comes from uncovering the farms and homes themselves. Through careful excavation, Egyptologists have been able to map entire ancient agricultural settlements. They can trace the outlines of mud brick houses, identifying different rooms, the living areas, the courtyards for processing food, and the cool, dark storage chambers where the large pottery jars of grain and dates were kept. But even more impressive is the ability to see the farm layout itself. Using a combination of excavation and satellite imaging, researchers have actually mapped the ancient irrigation canals that snaked through these communities. They can see how the water was diverted from the main spring, how the smaller channels branched off to feed individual plots, and even find the remains of what might be simple water-lifting devices like the shaduf. This allows us to understand the scale of their operations and the sophisticated communal planning required to manage such a precious resource. Perhaps the most profound finds are the smallest and most personal. In the dust of a collapsed home, an archaeologist might find a child's toy, a simple clay animal figurine. In a trash heap, they discover a broken piece of a beaded necklace or a worn-out leather sandal, its sole imprinted with the mark of its owner's foot. These objects transcend their function. They whisper of a life beyond mere subsistence. They tell us that children played in the shade of the palms, that people took pride in their appearance, and that a well-made pair of sandals was a valued possession. This physical evidence, from the grand network of canals to the tiny seed left behind, completes the picture. It transforms the oasis farmer from an abstract figure in a history book into a real, three-dimensional person, a skilled craftsman, a careful planner, a provider for his family, and a resilient human being who created a legacy of life in the sand, a legacy we can now hold in our hands. Walking through a modern Egyptian oasis today is like stepping into a living museum, where the echoes of the pharaohs are not just in the ruins, but in the very rhythm of daily life. The most striking continuity is the sight of a farmer, high in the crown of a date palm, performing the exact same delicate ritual as his ancient ancestors, hand pollination. In an age of drones and genetic modification, this millennia-old technique remains the gold standard for ensuring a bountiful harvest of high-quality fruit. The modern farmer might use a small puffing bottle or a bit of cotton to transfer the pollen instead of tying a male flower cluster directly, but the principle is identical. It's a powerful testament to the ancient farmer's flawless understanding of botany. They perfected a method so effective that modern science has yet to improve upon it. This intimate, hands-on care for each individual tree, this partnership between human and plant, is a thread that runs unbroken through time. The ancient shaduf, that iconic counterweighted lever, has largely been replaced by diesel-powered pumps that hum and chug, pulling water from deep wells with relentless efficiency. This is the most visible sign of modernization, yet the fundamental principle of water management, the equitable and meticulous distribution of every single drop through a network of canals, remains utterly unchanged. The water still flows along those same basic channels, often following routes first dug thousands of years ago. The modern farmer still walks his fields, shovel in hand, manually opening and closing small earth gates to direct the flow to specific plots. While the source of power has evolved from human muscle to fossil fuel, the foundational wisdom of water conservation, the understanding that this resource is the absolute limit of all life and prosperity, is a cultural inheritance that every new generation learns from the last. The technology above ground has changed, but the sacred conversation with the water below has not. Even the social structures have a remarkable resilience. The concept of reciprocal labor, where neighbors band together to bring in a harvest or repair a major canal, is still very much alive. While some larger operations might hire seasonal workers, for many families, the harvest is still a community event. You can hear the same sounds of collective effort, the calls between trees, the shared laughter, the communal meals prepared for the workers. The value placed on the knowledge of elders also persists. A young farmer will still defer to his grandfather's advice on which traditional variety of palm is most resistant to a new blight, or how to read subtle signs of soil exhaustion. This oral transmission of wisdom, this deep-seated respect for experiential knowledge over purely academic learning, is a cornerstone of oasis life that has defied the digital age. Perhaps the most profound bridge between ancient and modern is the crop itself. In the Siwa oasis, famous for its sublime Saidi dates, you can still find groves of palms that are direct descendants, often through continuous propagation of offshoots of trees that were ancient when Alexander the Great visited. These are living artifacts. The genetic lineage of the fruit you can buy in a market today can, in some cases, be traced back in an unbroken chain for over 2,000 years. The techniques for processing those dates also showcase a blend of old and new. While electric dehydrators might now be used for some of the crop, you will still see vast expanses of dates drying in the sun on traditional palm frond mats, exactly as they were in the time of the pharaohs. The ancient practice of pressing dates into dense, energy-rich cakes for easy transport and long storage is also still common, a perfect food for journeys that hasn't required reinvention. This isn't to say that time has stood still. Climate change presents a terrifying threat the ancients never faced, rapidly depleting the ancient fossil aquifers and forcing a new level of urgency in water conservation. New technologies like drip irrigation are being cautiously adopted in some areas to maximize efficiency. Global markets now demand new standards of size and appearance, influencing which date varieties farmers choose to plant. Yet, at its core, the life of the oasis farmer is still defined by the same partnership with the palm tree and the same battle against the encroaching desert. The modern farmer, like his forebear, is a master of resilience, holding on to the timeless techniques that work while carefully integrating the new tools that can help him survive. He is the inheritor and guardian of a way of life that represents one of humanity's most enduring victories against the elements, a tradition as sweet and lasting as the fruit he cultivates. So when we think of ancient Egypt, it's all too easy to let our minds be dominated by the grand and the glorious, the towering pyramids, the golden masks of pharaohs, the imposing temples along the Nile. These monuments are breathtaking, but they tell only part of the story. They speak of a top-down view of history, of power concentrated in the hands of the divine and the wealthy. The true beating heart of Egyptian civilization, the unsung engine that made all that grandeur possible, thrived far from the river's banks in the secluded, sun-drenched groves of the western desert. There, the Oasis Date Farmer lived a life of profound complexity, a masterful blend of backbreaking labor, ingenious innovation, and deep spiritual connection. Their story isn't one of isolated survival, but of essential integration. They were the vital anchor of a trade network that stretched across the desert, the keepers of a sustainable agricultural practice we would now call permaculture, and the quiet guardians of a water management science that turned certain death into abundant life. They didn't just grow fruit, they cultivated resilience itself. This resilience was their greatest gift to the world they inhabited. Every sweet, nutritious date they harvested was a caloric lifeline, a compact energy source that could be stored for years and transported across impossible distances. This wasn't just local food, it was fuel for empire. The dried dates and rich syrup that left the oasis on the backs of camels traveling the 40 days road helped feed the armies that secured Egypt's borders, sustained the laborers who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and nourished the scribes and administrators who managed the world's first great nation-state. The oasis farmer, in his seeming isolation, was in fact a critical node in the vast economic and social network of ancient Egypt. His labor directly contributed to the stability and longevity of a civilization that dazzles us to this day. Without the quiet, consistent abundance he wrested from the sand, the dazzling achievements of the pharaohs would have been far less certain, built on a far more fragile foundation. Their legacy, however, extends far beyond economics and into the realm of pure human spirit. These farmers teach us a powerful lesson about our relationship with the natural world. They did not conquer the desert, they listened to it, they learned its harsh language, understood its brutal logic, and found a way to collaborate with it. They knew the water beneath their feet was a finite gift, not an endless right, and they built an entire culture around its reverent and meticulous use. In an age facing our own profound environmental challenges, their example resonates with startling relevance. They embody a philosophy of working with an ecosystem, not against it, of finding abundance through balance rather than through brute force extraction. They prove that true prosperity isn't about dominating nature, but about understanding our place within it and nurturing a symbiotic relationship where all parts of the system support and strengthen each other. The next time you enjoy a date, perhaps as a quick snack or baked into a holiday treat, take a moment to hold it in your hand and consider its incredible journey. This simple fruit is a living artifact, a direct biological and cultural descendant of the very dates that grew in the oases of ancient Egypt. Let it be a tangible connection to those unsung men and women whose names are lost to history, but whose legacy is written in the continued life of the places they cherished. They remind us that history is not only made by kings and conquerors, but just as surely by the calloused hands of those who tenderly pollinate a flower, who patiently clear a water channel of sand, and who, against all odds, know how to make the desert bloom. Their story is a testament to the quiet, persistent power of human ingenuity and a humbling invitation to appreciate the deep, often hidden, foundations upon which our world is built.